Hi, I'm Eli Court from SoilsForLife. I recently caught up with New South Wales farmer and author Sam Vincent to chat about his book, My Father and Other Animals. Sam's book is, in his words, a love story to his father, a man ahead of his time in practicing regenerative agriculture. But it's also Sam's story of his journey to take on the family farm. I hope you enjoy this interview with Sam Vincent. Sam Vincent, welcome to the SoilsForLife podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So Sam, to kick off, you were raised on a farm, but it seems like you spent a lot of your life in the city. What led you to come back and get more involved in the family farm?
I was working as a university researcher and a journalist, and I was enjoying particularly the writing, the journalism. But I wasn't finding a fulfilling career. And then really happenstance intervened in 2014. My dad had an accident and he was in his late 60s at the time. And it really prompted a family meeting about what we were going to do with this small working farm by that stage. He'd retired from his city job and he was full-time on the farm. That was his idea of a retirement hobby, managing 650 acres. And I thought it would be fun to spend a couple of days a week working with him on the farm. And initially before it was fun, it was a necessity to keep him out of harm's way. He couldn't use his preferred hand for a while, but then I found that I enjoyed it, and I kept doing it for 7 years.
Yeah, it's interesting. You've written a book about this experience with the intriguing title, My Father and Other Animals. What's the book about, and what does the title mean?
So, the title was my editor's idea. It's a witty take on the Gerald Durrell classic, My Family and Other Animals. But the book really, I guess it charts this unexpected journey I went on from first just helping my dad out to then realizing that becoming a farmer was something I would love to do myself. And yeah, it kind of granted me this fulfillment in life and in work that I'd been grappling for without really knowing it the last decade.
And as well as documenting your own journey into farming, the book is also in many ways a book about your dad, as the title implies. Was there a point where you realised you wanted to write a book about your dad?
Yeah, I like to think of it as a love letter to my dad. I feel like in 2014 when he hurt his hand in what was a pretty spectacular accident. He was making he was chipping branches to make compost, and rather than cut the engine of the wood chipper like a normal person, when the blades jammed, he shoved a metal rod in it and it flicked back and broke his thumb. And at that stage when I started working with him, because he was injured, he was a bit of a mystery to me. Like I had a wonderful childhood out in the country, but I guess my dad was quite a typical laconic Australian man. We didn't have a lot to talk about. I didn't really know what made him tick. And I actually had no idea, what a visionary farmer he was, and that he'd gone through this transition from studying ag science at the University of Melbourne in the 1970s to then really becoming a regenerative farmer and an early adopter of a lot of techniques that are now much more widespread, such as holistic management, spreading compost tea, natural sequence farming. And so I guess I found that quite inspiring and interesting, that I'd never really taken an interest and known that he was doing this. And also seeing him in a different light, working with him, working for him, just seeing how gentle he was with caring for nature. I think that was his passion. And in many ways, now I struggle to see him in his earlier life working in an office. Now I understand why he retired as soon as he could and spent as much time outside as he could.
His story is unusual in some ways in that he had that career as a public servant and as you describe him as a free market economist. And it doesn't, even though you say he sort of in some ways escaped that to the farm and that made a lot of sense to you, it's not like he's left that part of himself behind. You talk in the book a lot about the economist's brain. Can you talk a little bit about how that comes out in his approach to farming?
For a long time, I grappled with how could these two things be consistent. He spends so much time explaining to me how this farm that we were working on, which is just north of Canberra, traditional sheep grazing country, been overgrazed, clapped out, pretty marginal soils for probably a century, and he'd been dedicating all this time to bringing back biodiversity. He recognises that, in his words, nature often needs a leg up. If it's been so degraded, we need to do things to stem that flow, whether that's planting trees, resting pastures. But then I think he has faith that once nature's recovered somewhat, it's almost like a self-organizing ecosystem that we don't have to over-manage it. It reaches a stage where it can keep improving if we just kind of keep our hands off it, not do anything too drastically bad to it, and it'll keep recovering. So I sense that that's kind of consistent with his view of the market, that it shouldn't be interfered with too much. But the economist brain definitely came through in other ways. I think one of the reasons he was attracted to regenerative agriculture, economists talk a lot about how there's no such thing as a free lunch, and for him, regen ag is an example of the possibility that there is a free lunch. We have this sunlight that can be harnessed in the most amazing way by growing broad-leafed plants, and same with rainfall. Our rainfall isn't a lot. Annual rainfall is 650 mils, but similarly, there is this free water, and if you can capitalize on that by retaining it in your soils, then it's a free lunch. I think that is quite consistent with the way he looks at the economy and broader society.
It's a great story, and it's surprising. I think that's part of what makes it great. So you started as your dad's apprentice, really. But at some point, you introduced your own new enterprise into the farm, the fig enterprise. Tell us a bit about how that came about.
Just socially, through living in the city, I had made friends with a lot of people who worked in kitchens, chefs and other hospitality staff. And they knew about the farm, and they knew that my parents had planted an orchard of 70 different fruit trees, initially for to be as self-sufficient as possible, but kind of got out of control. That's a lot of fruit. And one of those trees is a fig tree, a black Genoa fig tree, and it's really special. I don't know if it's the genetics, the aspect of the orchard, the soil, but the fruit it produces is just fantastic. Over a few years, I took cuttings off this one big mother tree and got them going in wicking beds, and then the next autumn I'd plant them out. So now I have 100 trees that are genetically identical to this big mother tree, and I sell figs to about 10 restaurants and cafes in Canberra, and I don't have enough fruit. Everyone loves them. I guess I made the decision to go for figs, not just because I had this tree, but because I'm so close to Canberra. Figs travel so poorly, so I had this advantage that I didn't need to pack them and send them away. I could just make deliveries a couple of times a week. They're organic, they're fresh, they're local, and they're high quality. And I only sell to high-end restaurants in Canberra. There's a lot of public servants with disposable income. So it was a good decision, I think. And through that process, I've discovered another part of farming that I think a lot of farmers don't get to experience, which is engaging with consumers. I spent a lot of time in in restaurants, particularly when they're closed, which is nice. Chefs are less stressed when they're not having to serve customers, and talking to chefs and what their customers like, and having chefs out to the farm and planning menus months in advance has been really, really lovely to kind of connect those two sides of the food chain.
And how much of your time goes towards that side of the business, like managing those relationships, the direct marketing and direct sales to restaurants part of the business?
Most of the farm's income is from cattle, but I would say maybe a third of the time I spend is to do with the orchards. I'm getting more fruit every year, but it does take a lot of time harvesting, delivering, teeing up orders, and then even in winter pruning. I have a small flock of sheep that I run in the orchards in the autumn, and both orchards are fully enclosed with netting, so I'm having to fix holes, and I make a lot of compost to fertilize the orchards. So yeah, I spend a lot of time on the orchards. It's not just a money-making scheme, though. I get a lot of joy from the fact that the farm does have these diverse aspects to it. I increasingly love working with cattle, but yeah, the figs are great, the different fruit trees, and then also revegetating the property. There's always different jobs to do, and different times of year call for different things. But I guess too, the social aspect of the orchards is nice. Cattle farming can be pretty solitary. Rather than, I just call my cattle agent occasionally when I want to sell some stock. It's different to going in and opening a restaurant door with a box laden with amazing figs and talking to people. It's a different side to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a bit of a passion project in a way, and Is it? Do you think it's a part of the business that will be profitable or on the way to profitability?
Yeah, definitely. So my partner started an Instagram account mainly to get new customers, and we no longer need to do that. I can't produce enough figs right now. I'm consistently having to knock back chefs in autumn who get in touch. Which is a great sign. I don't really have any competitors. There's a pretty small commercial fig growing industry in Australia, and hardly any high quality organic ones around where I am. So yeah, it's great.
One thing I think you do really well in the book is describe those challenging decisions that have to be made when weather conditions, livestock markets, and your regenerative goals for the farm collide or conflict. Can you talk a bit about your experience of the drought and about those difficult decisions that need to be made before and during and after drought?
Yeah, it is really tricky. The end of my farming apprenticeship, such as it was, coincided with the black summer drought, and we had been destocking gradually, but in retrospect we should have destocked earlier and more substantially than we did, and it was hard to see my dad kind of caught out a little bit, unsure what to do. I had grown over the last few years to think he had all the answers, but really stuck as he was. It showed, that we don't know when exactly a drought is going to break, and holding on, I'm just going to try and keep these cattle a little bit longer in the hope that it will rain. I think we did a bit of damage to our soils in the process, but that said, our farm has recovered much faster than all the other properties around us that are managing their livestock differently. I think I've learned some valuable lessons from that drought. I'm going to be pretty conservative in the way that I rebuild my cattle herd, which is what I'm doing now, and I'm now in a few groups of like-minded farmers, and we're constantly talking about the climate and really looking to be proactive about destocking rather than leaving it too late. My father, as a gift, I guess, when he and my mum moved down the coast, he cut a lot of hay for me, which was nice, but also frustrating. frustrating in that neither of us really subscribe to the idea that you should feed out hay and keep the same stocking numbers. I think it's a disincentive to look at the conditions around you and destock accordingly. And now I've got this shed full of hay, and I know that the forecast is for an El Nino that we don't know how long is going to last. So I'm going to be in this position where I have to be really disciplined, I think, and destock rather than just feed out hay. And the paddocks that they were cut from look far worse than the other paddocks because we've cut the nutrient cycling in them. But yeah, I appreciate the gesture. It was a nice thing to do. It just makes it a bit harder for me going forward to practice what I preach, I guess.
So you've taken an interest in the Indigenous history of Golian, and we know that lots of farmers are interested, but actually aren't sure how or where to start. So how did you start exploring it?
I guess there are a few threads. When I decided I wanted to take over this farm, I realized that I have to learn how what is currently going on farm was previously managed. So my dad had been teaching me things like, you can tell that this certain hill over there, that was previously a sheep camp by what's growing there. Similarly, the fact that there's all these Scotch thistle in this certain ditch indicates that there'd been previous overgrazing, or blackberries grow in wetter areas. Similarly, I really wanted to learn about how Indigenous people had managed what is now going on farm, and that kind of coincided with a friend of mine whose name is Dave Johnson. He's a legendary Indigenous archaeologist in the Canberra region, and just socially, he asked me one day if he could come to the farm and see if he could find any artifacts. And this was in 2016, which was a really dry start to the year. So there wasn't a lot of grass around, and I didn't realize this, but archaeologists love droughts because it's easy to find stuff in the grass. And we spent a few weeks in that autumn of 2016 just walking around, and it was so lovely. It was like seeing the landscape through new and different eyes. We kept finding a lot of signs of Indigenous occupation, what Dave called waste flakes, kind of the offcuts where stone tools had been made. And then one day on a hill that is in a paddock that my family called Bald Hill, because it's a kind of a strange geological formation, this hill by itself near a floodplain with quite distinct red soil. We're on that hill, and first of all, there was a really high concentration of waste flakes there. So we knew that Indigenous people had spent a lot of time there previously. And then one day, Dave found what he called a thumbnail scraper. It's about the size of a thumbnail. It's since been estimated to be about 5,000 years old, and it was a tool that would have been attached to a wooden handle probably, and used to gouge ochre out of this hillside. This hillside has ironstone and yellow ochre running through it. So that's what this tool would have been used for. And yeah, ochre was a valuable resource to Ngunnawal Ngambri people. It was used in birthing ceremonies, weddings, initiation ceremonies. Ochre would be rubbed on to the body. So the ochre quarry that Dave had found, I guess it was unique in that there were a lot of ochre quarries around the Canberra region, but several of them are now buried under suburbs. Dave told me that if we wanted to, we could apply to have it protected as what's called an Aboriginal place under New South Wales heritage legislation. And starting in 2016, through Dave, Ngambri and Ngunnawal elders came out to the site, and just to see it, they had no idea it was there, and that was a really great few weeks for me personally, talking to these elders and seeing what it meant to them. First of all, to be invited onto farms owned by white settlers, I didn't realise how rare that was. But seeing how emotional they got, kind of reconnecting with this past. Ochre probably hadn't been mined from the quarry for 100 years, maybe 200 years. But to kind of to restart that cultural connection was something important to see, and then seeing the Ngunnawal and Ngambri elders take that driving, sit in the driver's seat to really have this site protected was something great to see. And since then, these elders bring out school groups. Occasionally they bring out their families to just see and reconnect the quarry. But from a farming perspective, nothing has really changed.
And could you tell me a bit more about what that formal recognition of that site means?
So it means I can graze its slopes, but I can't put a house on it. I can't build on it. It's in a pretty remote spot. I wouldn't want to anyway. But for me, I take solace from the fact that future landholders will have to respect the legislation.
So how does it practically work? You said the local traditional owners will come out to the site occasionally. They'll bring school groups. Like, how does that actually work? Do you have an agreement with them? Is it an informal arrangement? What are the practicalities of that?
It's pretty informal. I've been looking to make a management plan with the elders for a while. We haven't yet done that, but no, they talk to me about it, and we make sure that, for instance, I don't have cattle grazing the day that they want to bring school kids out. I think it's quite respectful from both sides. Yeah, just seeing these elders and hearing their stories and what it means to them to reconnect with the farm in what is, to my family, this hill was just called Bald Hill. It had no historical, cultural significance to us, but it does to a pretty important segment of the Canberra community, and being able to recognise that and respect that in a way that doesn't detract from our farming enterprise is a pretty nice win-win situation, and a message that I want to spread near and far.
I'm interested in what sort of views you've encountered amongst those city non-farmer readers of the book.
I think there is a disconnect in Australia between the urban majority and the rural minority. The reality is, even though Australia's myths tend to be grounded in the bush, the solitary farmer, most Australians haven't set foot on the farm for a very long time, and they have views that farmers are idiots or environmental vandals, or there's somehow no skill or thought that goes into this. I think it's funny, now that I am a farmer, how many friends in the city offer to help on the farm. And it's nice on one level, but also, what are you going to do if you're building a fence and it's kind of more of a burden to have someone who doesn't know what they're doing? You don't tell a lawyer friend, hey, can I come and help with your legal briefs? I think that cuts to this view that farmers don't really have any skills or knowledge. I wanted to try and break down that barrier a little bit, especially in the last decade or so in Australia. We've seen this real explosion in farmers markets, in a middle class interest in eating well and sourcing seasonal produce, and what is also beginning to be an interest in sourcing produce that's been farmed in a way that, whether it's organically or ethically or increasingly regeneratively, I think there's more interest in that. So I wanted to break down some of those barriers. I don't know. I think it's been a bit mixed, to be honest. I did an event at Sydney Writers Festival, which was primarily city people in the audience, and some of the questions at the end, I feel like they still were a bit frustrating from my perspective. There was still an assumption that cattle farming is bad, the nuance that I was trying to instill in the book, to point out that there's a huge difference between raising the Amazon to put cattle there and grazing ruminants in rangelands carefully and moving them judiciously in a way that's improving biodiversity and the soil health. I was trying to instill that nuance, but I still encounter a lot of questions that things like, so will you stop farming cattle now that you've got the figs? I guess that's an obvious one, this assumption that figs are somehow good and cattle are somehow bad, when the message I want to spread the most is that it's not what you're farming that counts, it's how you're farming.
I understand that it's about to be republished, and congratulations on that. I think that's a really good place to end the conversation.
Thanks, Ellie.
If you enjoyed this interview, consider subscribing to the Soils for Life podcast, available on your favourite podcast platform or via our website www.soilsforlife.org.au. Thanks for listening.